the geography is constantly changing. So you're never really dealing with like one sort of landscape for too long. So it's always kind of changing. So you always feel like there's something new around the corner. Because, with that amount of time, if you're just hiking in a forest, it would get pretty tedious after a while. But the landscape keeps changing and keeps things interesting for you.
Welcome to Experiences You Should Have, your how-to guide for amazing experiences. I'm your host, Gail Manasco, and today we are learning about an amazing thru hike through New Zealand called the Te Araroa, or also known as the TA. Now, I haven't been to New Zealand. It's on the list, but we do have a variety of episodes about New Zealand, and including experiencing the Milford Sound and blackwater rafting. Now, as an American, I don't know when I'm going to get to go to New Zealand, but if you are able to go to New Zealand, definitely add these experiences to your bucket list. Now, the TA thru hike is one of the newest thru hikes in the world. And if you're into thru hiking, also check out the episode about hiking the Appalachian Trail. So I interviewed Daniel Boothroyd for this episode, who hiked the entire TA. He's 28 years old. He lives in Nova Scotia, and he loves long distance hiking. He completed the TA in 2017 and plans on hiking the PCT in 2022. So let's get on with the adventure. Well, welcome to Experiences That You Should Have, Daniel.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, it's very exciting. So we're talking about a very kind of a new trail. I hope I don't butcher this. Te Araroa.
Araroa? The Te Araroa.
Oh man, you're so much better at it.
I've said it a few times.
I know, we were just practicing. We're going to call it hiking the TA.
Sounds good.
Is that how other people refer to it, hiking the TA?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same with like the American trails, right? Like nobody calls it the Pacific Crest Trail. It's just
right.
PCT.
PCT, and then hiking the AT, which we have an episode on hiking the AT, the Appalachian Trail. So listeners out there, go check it out. So you hiked the TA in New Zealand. Can you just describe to our listeners kind of what this trail is?
Yeah. So I should say at the beginning, I did this trip with a friend. I was a little intimidated to go at it alone, but it's a long distance hiking trail that I think it opened up in 2011, and it stretches from the northern tip of the North Island in Cape Uranga to the bottom of the South Island in Bluff. So it's approximately 3,000 kilometers through the length of the country.
Wow. So, I mean, you've got water separating the islands. I mean, how did you navigate that? Because it's not fully just hiking, right?
No, well, I mean, when you hit Wellington at the bottom of the North Island, I mean, you just jump onto the ferry and it takes you across to a little town called Picton. And then from there, we caught a mail boat and it drops you up to the top of the island to jump on the Queen Charlotte track, and you just keep on from there.
Yeah. Okay. Now this is a fairly new thru hike, right?
Yeah.
So when did you hike the TA?
So we did it in the 2016-2017 season. So I think it was about the 5th season it was officially open. So it was still pretty new.
That's pretty epic. I mean, you're hiking a new thru hike through New Zealand, and it's only been around for, 5 or 6 years? That's incredible.
About that. It was really nice, actually, because it's gotten a lot more popular since then. So I think we kind of hit it at a point where like there were still people on it, and there was a nice little community, but it wasn't like an overwhelming amount of traffic.
So let's just describe the experience to our listeners. I mean, take us to the beginning of the trail And also why you decided to embark on this.
Well, the why was kind of it was a bit of a situation that snowballed. Really, I had recently dropped out of school and was just working and saving some money and kind of needed to have a goal in mind. So I'd always been kind of drawn to New Zealand and always wanted to go there.
Mm-hmm.
And was just like looking up stuff to do there because I didn't really want to just go and like bartend in New Zealand, do the same thing. So I was like looking up hiking trails and came across the TA, and it was just kind of one of those. As soon as I saw it, the idea kind of just got stuck in my head, and I kind of just was like, I'm gonna have to do this, otherwise, it's just always gonna gnaw at me.
That's very exciting. Now, where were you living at the time when you decided
Uh,
to do this?
this is in Halifax, Nova Scotia.
Wow.
Yeah,
And who was your friend? Did they
it was my friend of mine, Owen. He was living out there at the same time, and I asked him just because he just kind of had the time available when we were
Yeah.
thinking about doing it. So I just kind of asked him because I was a little intimidated to do it alone because I didn't
Uh-huh.
really know much about long distance hiking at this point.
Yeah. What would you say was your biggest fear?
I just think I was just intimidated by the size and the time commitment of it all. Like
Yeah.
it's hard to picture that size of a trail if you don't really know sort of what
Mhm.
it's all about.
Mhm.
So just like the sheer number and like thinking about, hiking for 5 to 6 months was just a bit daunting, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. So this was your first through hike?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then
Yeah.
did you want to be a purist about it? Did you want to go through the entire thing
Yeah,
in one go?
we were kind of a little easier on that front.
Mhm.
Like I think we passed through the trail goes directly through like Auckland, like downtown Auckland, and I had some family there, and we just kind of decided, small stretch here and there we would pass over, or if the weather was bad. But generally, we stuck to the entire trail unless it was a sort of a weather situation or there were washouts, which
Yeah.
does happen quite often there because the weather's pretty volatile.
Uh-huh. So let's go back to the beginning of the trail. Kind of walk me through that moment.
Yeah, so the first day was pretty scary. I had booked a bus to take us up to Cape Reinga.
Mhm.
What I didn't realize is that it was a tourist bus,
Oh.
and so we got on, and it was the bus driver knew what we were up to. He was like, "Oh, you boys are heading up to do the TA today, aren't you?" And we were like, "Yep." We're both pretty quiet. Get onto the bus, and it's full of like 60-year-old couples on vacation. So we're just
Uh-huh.
quietly hanging out at the back of the bus. And so the bus, for at one point, drives down 90 Mile Beach, which is sort of the beginning stretch of the trail. And we passed by a hiker, and the bus driver gets on his intercom and he's like, "Oh, that man right there, he's just started his 3,000-kilometer journey all the way through the entire country." And everybody's, oohing and awing at the whole thing. And then he turns around. It's like, just so happens we have two young men at the back of the bus that are starting that today. Everybody turns back and
Ah!
looks at us. I feel like I'm about to throw up. Everybody's asking us questions. We got there too when we were standing at the start of the trail. People were like taking our photos and stuff, and I'm just like, I can't talk to anybody right now. So it was a little bit of a weird start.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But yeah, from there, I mean, it was all pretty straightforward. The first day, it was pretty short to a campsite, and then your first real stretch of trail is 90 Mile Beach, which isn't actually 90 miles. But
Really?
yeah, it's like, I think it's 88 kilometers or something like that.
Oh, that's funny.
I can't remember how it got landed on the name of 90 Mile Beach, but yes, it's not 90 miles.
Okay.
But yeah, that was a very challenging first stretch because it's basically 3 days of sand dunes on your left, beach and ocean, and just nothing changes. So time really, you lose all sense of time. There's like no sense of progress. So it's really a bit of a mind trip at the very start.
How did you work through that mind trip?
I just tried not to think about it really. I remember the second day, because
Mm-hmm.
I kept checking my watch, like you have nothing else to think about. So I was very focused on keeping track of the time. And I think on the second day, I was like, I'm not going to look at my watch at all. And it turned around. I was like, all right, I'm going to look at it when I think an hour has gone by. And I think it was about 15 minutes when I genuinely thought an hour had passed. So it was, yeah, it was a long 3 days.
Okay, so you made it through the sand dunes, the ocean on the first 3 days, and then what'd you hit next?
The next part is also the trail really puts you through the ringer at the beginning, actually. So that's
Oh,
usually the place where the most people drop out, is like the first 300 kilometers.
mm-mm.
So right after, when you finish the beach, you hit the Northland forests, which are just like, it's I've never seen mud like I have there. It's just like vines hanging from the trees. The trail's barely marked up there, and it's just like mud pits, like almost up to your knee. You just step into it sometimes.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was a real slog.
So, I mean, we're like, what kept you not giving up in this period?
I mean, I think it was probably more just, you know, we're here. And then when you're
Mm-hmm.
in the middle of the forests, it's just like, well, it's the same going backwards as it is going forwards. So
Mm-hmm.
you may as well just go for it.
Right.
But it was definitely tough at the beginning because didn't really know what we were doing. Just the terrain at the start was brutal, but it made everything else feel a lot easier afterwards.
Oh, well, that's exciting. Do the hardest part first, and then it becomes more enjoyable, right?
Yeah, I was actually a little bit bummed they've closed off one of the forests on the track in the last couple seasons,
Oh,
which is a bit
really?
of a bummer because I think it's a bit of a rite of passage. But
Oh. So you made it through the forest and the mud, and then where'd you end up after that?
then you get to a little town on the east coast called Kerikeri, and that's kind of like, if you make it to Kerikeri, you stand a pretty good shot of making the whole thing.
Now, what is in Keri Keri?
Not much. It's just a little town, really. But that's
Yeah.
just sort of all the track leading to there is sort of the make or break you kind of point.
Okay. So you made it to Keri Keri. You
Yeah.
knew that you can continue. You knew that
Well, we
that
felt
the
like,
end
we'd
was
we'd
achievable.
yeah, exactly. We'd learned some things. We'd shed a few items from our bags and just kept on.
All right. So so what happened after Keri Keri?
So then the trail mostly goes along the east coast from there, kind of skirting around inland and through forests and some
Uh-huh.
beaches, until you get to Auckland, which I think is probably like 500 kilometers along the trail. So that was like the first real big kind of like, you have a good chunk of distance under your belt. And when we got there, it was kind of like, all right, like making some headway here.
Yeah.
So that
So
was
and
a
then
big
you
one.
mentioned you had some family in Auckland, right?
Yeah. So that was the other bonus. I mean, we had a place to stay, and, we crashed there for a few days and got to, have some home cooked meals and catch up with some people, have some drinks. It was kind of a nice little break.
I bet a bed felt so good after
Yeah. Yeah. I
the
mean, especially like an actual bedroom, not just like, a hostel dorm where you feel
right,
self conscious for stepping in because you just smell like garbage.
right, right. So how long did it take you to get to Auckland?
I think that one was about 4 or 5 weeks, maybe.
4 or 5 weeks. Wow.
Yeah.
See, that's
Yeah.
that's a good little celebration there.
Yeah. That was the first sort of milestone, I'd say, where felt like we'd actually covered some real ground. Because I mean, when you look at it on the map, because it's such a long distance, you finish 90 Mile Beach, and then you look, it's like, oh, check out how much we walked, and then you zoom out further on the map, and you're like, oh, we haven't gone anywhere.
So you got to hang out in Auckland, celebrate, get some home cooked meals. Take us on the next part of the hike.
Um, it's a kind of a little bit of a blur, honestly. I remember sort of one of the next big highlights, a little bit south of there, is you hit Tongariro National Park,
Hmm.
which there's a trail there called the Tongariro Crossing, and it's like a hugely popular day walk. There's probably like peak season 5,000 people going through there a day,
Wow.
but we do cross over it, and it's one of the most beautiful walks I think I've ever done. Even though it's super busy, it's just this really volcanic sort of area, and it's almost like you feel like you're on Mars. And that's definitely a very big highlight around that area. And it's nice because you go the opposite way of all the tourist traffic. So if you get up super early, you can get up sort of halfway over it and not see anybody. So that's kind of
Wow.
a nice little bonus about it.
That's exciting. It's like you're entering in a whole nother world.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of New Zealand in general. It's both Canada and the United States, we have such a wide variety of landscapes, but it's just so huge. But New
Hmm.
Zealand has that same variety, but it's all just kind of like smushed together in such a small space that it's all very accessible.
I know, it's very impressive. I'm very impressed with New Zealand.
It really is like a magical place. I do
All
love
right,
it
well, but
there.
let's keep on going on the hike. We're still hiking with you.
All right. So yeah, so Tongariro was definitely a highlight. There is a part of the trail actually that you paddle. So we spent a week canoeing along the Wanganui River, which
So,
was
how did you set that up? I mean, could you just rent a canoe to or kayak to get in and then drop off?
yeah. So we took off from a place that we had already passed through. So when we got there the first time, we sort of like
Hmm.
found our little group of people that we were going to do it with, just because it's cheaper if there's more of you. So I think
Yeah.
we had about seven of us that did that trip together. And so we just got to this town and we booked our canoes and kayaks and all that for like the following week. Continued hiking along a certain stretch, and then we hitchhiked back to the town. You buy all your food, they bring the canoe barrels to you, and you just pack everything up in there, and then they drive you out to the river, and off you go. You do
Wow.
have to book some campsites along that way as well, though, because it's part of there's a few trails in New Zealand called the Great Walks,
Uh huh.
and those are just sort of like popular multi-day ones, and you do have to pay for campsites and book them ahead of time.
Now, I've
But
never
you're
really heard
able,
of a through hike that also includes like canoeing or kayaking. I think that's really interesting.
yeah. Well, it's kind of weird. Like officially on the trail, I think you're only on the water for like a day or two, but sort of like the
Hmm.
unofficial way everybody just was doing it because you're going through all the trouble of paying and booking all the gear. So you may as well just paddle
Right.
the whole river at that point. So that's pretty much what
Right.
everybody ended up doing. And then we spent about a whole week on the river, which
Wow.
was yeah, it was beautiful. And it was kind of like a bit of a vacation really because you're no longer having to carry all the food on your back. So bring a box of wine with you, a bottle of whiskey, fresh fruit. So
Yeah.
it was kind of like a vacation, and it was right around Christmas time as well. So we were all kind of in a celebratory mood.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah, but
So
yeah,
you,
it is a bit strange paddling on a through hike, but that's just
right.
part of it.
Oh, makes it unique.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And it's a great river.
So what happened after the river?
Well, so then you get to Wanganui, and so around that point, you're getting pretty close to being done the North Island. So I think where would that be? That's got to be kicking right around the halfway mark, I think. So the North Island's 1,700 kilometers, and the South Island is 1,300.
Okay.
So from there, we kind of you cut through a few little towns and stuff until you get to the next really cool range, which is the Tararuas, which are sort of a little spine of mountains that run north to south from Wellington, and that was another big sort of highlight area. pretty. It can be pretty gnarly up there. Like it's got some rough weather, and it's all pretty exposed ridgeline walking. So you're like maybe got a few feet on either side of you, and it can be the wind can be blowing pretty hard up there.
Yeah.
But
Wow.
yeah, that was another highlight for sure.
And
And
then did
then
you get on the ferry after that?
yep, from there you get right into to Wellington, and then everybody kind of has a little bit of a party in Wellington, just because it's the end of the North Island.
Okay.
That feels like a pretty big win right there. And then
That
yeah,
is a
you
big
just
win.
yeah,
You
it
just
feels pretty good.
you just hiked the entire North Island of
Yeah,
New Zealand.
and then too, I mean, it's pretty exciting because the everybody's really looking forward to the South Island because it's a different landscape there. It's a little bit more rugged, and there's no little to no road walking. So that's kind of the thing about the North Island that a lot of people kind of get turned off on is because the trail's so new. There is a good stretch of, or a good amount, I should say, of road walking where they're just
Hmm.
trying to connect from pre-existing trails, and they just haven't found a route to get there off of the road yet. So that is something that the trail in the years to come is slowly getting rid of. But
Mm,
yeah, that is a big chunk of the North Island. So it's just nice to get that over with
yeah.
for sure.
So now you're on to the fun South Island.
Yeah. So the South Island was definitely at the very beginning quite a stretch because we had to do our biggest food carries. Probably, I think, on the first 3 or 4 sections of the South Island, where we were packing about 7 to 10 days of food, which is it's a lot of weight.
That is a lot of weight.
Yeah. And it's also in probably the most rugged terrain we'd seen so far. So, you're really kind of just jumping in head first.
So, what was the most like rugged part of the terrain? Are you going up mountains or are you on the side of like cliffs or what? And kind of tell me a little bit more about the terrain.
Yeah, no, so it's a lot of ridgeline walking. Kiwis really, I don't think they know what switchbacks are
Uh
because
huh.
they just love to lead you just straight up the mountain. There's no like kind of meandering around it or snaking your way up. It's just like kind of you just charge on right up ahead.
All
And there's
right.
a lot of parts too where they classify the trails as more of a route where there's no actual like visible footpaths. It's just the sporadic sort of pole markers. So you'd have to keep a pretty sharp eye on where you're going
Okay.
because if you miss a marker, it's pretty easy to just sort of like wander off the path when there is no actual path there.
Ah,
So you're in. Yeah, it's the weather there, as I said too, is pretty rugged. Like you can get 4 seasons in one day, and it won't let up on you.
wow. Did you get snowed on?
We didn't get snow, no. We definitely got a lot of rain though.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then
Whew.
in sort of that area too, the rain's pretty dangerous because there's a lot of river crossings that you have to deal with. So you kind of have to watch out there because the water levels can rise pretty quick.
How are you feeling mentally with all that?
I don't know, it changed from day to day. I think it was a lot harder at the start, mostly just because everything's so new, and we were learning a lot and making a lot of mistakes, but you slowly start to figure things out. And then sort of especially by that point in time, like you do kind of find your little community as well. At the start of the trail, you meet people, but you might meet them once and they take off ahead or you take off ahead. But once you sort of find your rhythm, you start seeing the same faces, and so you kind of just have like a nice little knit group of people that you just kind of you're just casually bumping into every now and again. You might not see somebody for a week, but then you roll into a town and they're sitting on the sidewalk eating a pie.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool.
So that definitely helped. I think that was sort of an unexpected treat of the trail. Really, was that sense of community.
Hmm.
Wasn't something I was expecting, but definitely contributed to making the trip.
Huh.
But I think, I don't know, mentally, I really started to fall in love with the trail, I think, when the very beginning, everything's new, feels like an adventure. But when that sort of started to slip away and it just started feeling like it was your day to day life, was kind of really where I was pretty on board with the whole notion of through hiking for sure.
It's fun. It's
Yeah.
really fun.
I mean, it's just a simple way to live, It's when your day to
Mm-hmm.
day is just checking on how much food you have, where your water sources are coming from, how many more kilometers to your next resupply point. Figure that out and you just go for it.
I love it.
Yeah.
Absolutely love it. So you made it through some rugged terrain,
hmm
and then where'd you go? What was your next highlight?
Well, I mean, really, the entire South Island was pretty incredible. It runs basically straight through the center of the island,
Mm-hmm.
sort of on the fringes of the Southern Alps down there. So you're in pretty mountainous terrains. There's a lot of really nice valley walking, a lot of like really tussocky kind of country,
Mm-hmm.
and it's getting by that time in the year too. It's nice and hot, and there's a ton of like water around everywhere. So you can have a nice swim in the lake in the middle of the afternoon, which was definitely a treat. You didn't get that too much on the North Island. So just having all those sort of glacial lakes at your disposal was definitely a bonus.
Wow, it sounds, gosh, just incredible. I mean, I don't know, glacier lakes. I mean,
Yeah, I mean it's especially when you're just like sitting in the sun and it's like they're crystal clear, ice cold, nobody's around. You come across the odd hot pool from time to time. That was pretty nice.
uh-huh,
It's and just like the geography is constantly changing, so you're never really dealing with like one sort of landscape for too long.
uh-huh.
So it's always kind of changing. So you always feel like there's something new around the corner.
Yeah.
Because with that amount of time, if you're just hiking in a forest, it would get pretty tedious after a while. But the
Mm-hmm.
landscape keeps changing and keeps things interesting for you.
Wow. So what would you say was your favorite part about the South Island?
I'd say, I mean, there was one section that was quite cool. It's called the Wayu Pass, and it's in
Mm-hmm.
Nelson Lakes National Park, and that was a really beautiful area. There's this lake called Blue Lake, kind of high up in the mountains, and you're just kind of going through these valleys and up and over these mountain saddles, and there's just all these lakes scattered about. And there's the Wayu Pass it was one of the coolest, but probably one of the most sketchiest moments on the trail, where
Mm.
it felt like you were getting to borderline rock climbing instead of hiking anymore.
Whoa.
Yeah, it was like just a pretty steep descent where you're going down with your hands as well as your feet. It's pretty
That
New
sounds pretty gnarly.
Zealand's yeah, New Zealand's pretty gnarly when it comes to stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like I meet a lot of people that had done the PCT and some of the other sort of big through hiking trails, and a lot of them a lot of people complained about sort of the status of the trails there. 'Cause, the PCT is, I mean, I'm pretty sure the entire thing's equestrian grade, isn't it?
I'm not quite sure. I can't answer that.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll have to check my facts on that one.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
it's pretty well made, and you can you can pretty much easily follow it the entire time. But yeah, the TA really just, like I said, I mean, sometimes there's not even an actual trail, you're just following a route. So it can get pretty gnarly out there. And then,
Yeah.
when you're in that type of situation and you get it on a bad day, it's like there's lots of places where we went through where I was just grateful that it was sunny and no wind.
Yeah. Well, take us on the last month of your hike.
The last month is a little bit weird. More,
Oh, what happened?
well, it's more kind of more mentally weird, I think, where you slowly start to realize that you're actually getting towards the end
Uh huh.
because you kind of don't even really think about the end when you start because it's just so far away. It's just not even really on your radar. But then I
Sure.
remember when we got to Queenstown, which is a crazy little town, it's pretty south on the South Island. That was definitely a moment where, like, man, like, we're actually pretty close to being finished with this thing. And
Yeah.
there's that sort of anxiety of like, well, like, what the hell are we going to do next? Like, you get so used to living that way, you by that point we'd been on the trail for at least 4 months. So
Wow.
you're pretty well adjusted to it. And a lot of our sort of friends that we had made along the way were kind of in the same boat, almost to the point where some of us even started slowing our pace down a little bit at the end.
Huh.
So we were trying to drag it out because I really didn't want to be done.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. I remember we were 2 days away from finishing the trail, and we were at a hostel, and I think we spent 2 or 3 days there just kind of hanging out with some of our buddies. We were all like pretty reluctant to carry on because as soon as we finished, it was just like, oh, now we gotta, you gotta go
No,
back
it's
to real
done.
life.
Right.
This goal or idea that you've had in your head for a year,
Yeah.
2 years, whatever is done, and it's kind of like, yeah, just it felt very strange to be getting close to the end.
Yeah. I've had that where I've had like a goal that I've worked for a long time, and then you do it, and which
Hmm.
feels great, and then you're like, well, okay, well, yeah, now what?
Yeah,
Right.
it is a bizarre sensation. There's a really good documentary about these four guys that they adopted and trained wild mustangs and rode them from the Mexican border to the Canadian border through public land in the States. And one of the guys on that trip, he said, I'm roughly quoting him, where he was like, when they were getting near the end of their trip, he was saying, part of me is like so ready to be done with this thing and just get to the finish line and be over with. But like at the same time, 2 or 3 weeks down the line, I know I'm just going to want to wish I was back out here. That's kind of the sentiment I felt about it all.
Hmm. So, so what happened on your final day?
So yeah, the last day we kind of went a little bit crazy where we lumped the last 2 days together in one,
Wow.
essentially. We had talked about doing like a 40-kilometer day, but we hadn't done it yet. And so the end of the trail really isn't all that scenic. There's a lot of like highway, and there's one nice long beach section, but it's not like, it's not the landscape that you've been used to seeing the last 5.5 months. So
Hmm.
basically, we just decided to make it a little bit more exciting to finish off was hike the last 2 days in one. So I think it ended up being like 65 kilometers.
Whew.
Yeah. And we
My
walked from
goodness.
8 in the morning and we finished just before midnight. So we were hiking well into the night.
Wow.
So we did our 40-kilometer day in the end.
Whew. My
Yeah.
goodness.
It was pretty surreal. And then when we got there, we were beat. So we were sitting there looking at the sign, and we didn't have any place to stay that night or anything. We didn't really know what we were doing. And at midnight, this woman drove up in her car and she rolled down her window and she was like, "Did you boys just finish the TA?" And we're like, "Yep." She's like, "Do you have anywhere to go?" And we're like, "Nope." She's like, she took us in her car and she let us crash on her couch that night.
Wow.
Yeah. She sat us down, made us coffee, and she was like, "It's a really beautiful thing you guys just did." And it was like,
Oh,
that was a really nice way to finish it, I think.
that would be so cool to live near the end of a hike and go see.
Yeah, it's a big thing there. Like Bluff, where it ends, is just this kind of little old fishing town, and there's a few little touristy sort of things there. There's a ferry you can take from there further on to another island called Stewart Island,
Uh-huh.
but there's not a ton there. But a lot of the little communities that are around the trail have really sort of embraced it and quite love it, really. There's
Hmm.
a lot of people that have just offered like random services that live along the trail. They've just volunteered, odd little services, be it like ferry crossings or just places to stay. So there are a lot of people that live along the trail that are just like super into it and are super welcoming,
Hmm.
which again was sort of one of the things that I didn't really expect from the trail, but was pretty pleasantly surprised,
Oh, that's
to
fun.
say the least. Yeah.
And do you think this hike changed you?
Um, I wouldn't. I mean, it definitely wasn't like there was no like light bulb moment, you know.
Uh huh.
But I definitely think, I mean, it definitely has changed the way I'm sort of focused in my goals now. I mean, ever since then, I'm pretty much focused on like just going back home. I work, I save, and then go hike somewhere else for an
Yeah.
extended period of time. You know.
Where else have
So
you hiked since then?
a few years after that, I did two trails in Canada. I did the Bruce Trail in Ontario. And
Uh
then when
huh.
I finished that, I flew to Newfoundland and hiked the East Coast Trail out there.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, after doing the TA in New Zealand, I felt that, I should probably, before I go do any other trails, I should probably see a little bit of my own country.
Right.
Cause,
Yeah.
I felt a little guilty. As like, man, I almost know New Zealand better than my own home.
Yeah. No, that's really
So
interesting.
yeah, did those two trails over a summer. And then my last trip, which was ended just a few months ago, it wasn't a through hiking trip, but I did just go back to New Zealand and just sort of kind of hit around spots that I wanted to go to that the TA doesn't take you through. And I mean, really just to spend time in New Zealand. I'm a little bit obsessed with the place.
Yeah. It's pretty cool.
It's got its grips in me.
Yeah. Well, after you spend so much time there, I mean, how could it not?
Yeah. I mean, I think anybody that goes there pretty much feels the same way. Like before I'd even been there, I don't think I'd ever heard anybody say anything bad about it that had been
No.
there.
Yeah. Yeah. I only hear good things about New
Yeah.
Zealand.
I'm a big fan.
Well, let's get into some logistics here. First off, when did you start and when did you end? And should people start and end when you did?
Yeah, so most people, I think there's a pretty broad range of timeline where you can complete the whole trail, and it's usually in around 4 to 6 months,
Okay.
roughly. So we kind of set out with the intentions of doing it over 6 months. We didn't want to feel rushed, and if we found some place we liked, we wanted to feel free that we can stay there for a couple days or whatever. Like for us, it wasn't a race. We were
Yeah.
just there to be out there. So
Right.
we started early in the season. So our start day was October 10th, I believe it was.
Okay.
So that's just sort of springtime, and then finished at the end of March 29th. So that's kind of the broad timeline. If you start a little bit later, that's fine if you're moving a little bit quicker. But I think that's sort of a good basis for walking the whole trail southbound. It'd be a
Yes.
little bit more difficult, I think, to do it northbound the whole way, just because of the climate and the seasons. Because you'd be
Mm-hmm.
getting you'd just be starting in the South Island when there's still a lot of snow melts. Rivers would be higher, weather would be rougher when you're kind of in the higher altitude spots. So
Mm-hmm.
it is a little bit more practical to go southbound
Okay.
if you're
Did you
doing
find
both
that a lot of
islands.
people went northbound or did you find the majority of people went southbound?
There were people that were going northbound, typically were only doing the South Island.
Okay.
So
Got
there
it.
was like a sort of a chunk of time where we were crossing paths with northbounders, which was really nice because like we'd have helpful information for each of us,
Uh-huh.
telling everybody kind of what they have laid ahead. There was one northbound walker that actually saved us from being stuck in the rain for 3 days because we were on the tail end of a section, and we were about to finish for the day, and he was like, had just come out from town. He's like, "You boys really ought to move quick because there was a river crossing right before you get into town." And he's like, "You got 3 days of solid rain coming your way." So we pushed on into the night and were able to cross the river early in the next day. And sure enough, it was like 3 full straight days of rain. And
Wow.
unfortunately, we had some buddies that got caught on the other side of it and they had to wait it out. But we
Yeah.
were cozy in our hostel. It was, it was quite nice.
Yeah. Now, how much did you save to do this? How much did it cost?
Well, I'd say I would budget for, you're probably going to want at least like 1,500 probably per month. I mean, you could use more because you're going to be hungry and it's pretty easy to spend money when you're out there.
Sure.
When you're in town, I mean, obviously not out there.
Right.
But, and then gear, I mean, gears from scratch, it's pretty easy to spend a lot of money on that as well because
Right.
if you're going to want to go ultra light, it's not the cheapest thing in the world. But as far as like actual like living costs on the trail,
Yeah.
you're probably looking 1,500 to 2,000 a month.
Okay.
There aren't too many fees along the trail either, which is good. They do ask for a donation of $250 per island. And the only other thing you have to get is a backcountry hut pass, which only cost about $92 and it's good for 6 months. So it's pretty economical.
Yeah, that's not too bad.
Yeah.
Now, how far in advance did you plan for this hike?
I'd say about, it was from deciding to do it to actually getting there was probably about a year and a half.
Okay.
Yeah.
What did you do in that year and a half? How did you prepare?
Well, I didn't do a very good job of it, really. We tried to draw out a bit of a plan for when we got there, but we learned pretty quickly that our plan wasn't going to stick to the timeline that we had sort of conjured up, and it kind of all went out the window within the first couple weeks.
Okay.
As far as planning ahead, I mean, just doing your research into sort of what gear you want, what do you want to have in your kit, and just some like, basic safety stuff and, just resources about other through hikes. I mean, there's a lot of people out there that would be happy to talk to and
Mm-hmm.
get information from. But as far as like the logistical planning of the trail when we were there, we kind of did a lot of it on the fly, really. I mean, the system that we ended up using was we would be doing one section. I say section as in like just the between two resupply points. It's like, you get your food and then you finish the section till the next place where you can resupply.
Mm-hmm.
And we would basically on one section plan the section ahead. And then when we got there, kind of rinse and repeat. So we were always planning the next section ahead of the one that we were on. And that just afforded us sort of a little bit more leeway and time and that kind of thing.
Now, what did you do for water? I mean, carrying a lot of water, I feel like would be really heavy. Did you do like a life straw along the way or like a water filter?
Yeah, we did. We filtered all of our water, but there's a ton of water in New Zealand, most ways along the trail. So you really didn't have to deal with any sort of big water carries. I
Uh-huh.
mean, I'd say for almost the entire trail, like you never really had to carry much more than like 2 liters on you at any given time
Yeah.
because there's just plenty of water sources along the way. But yeah, you would need to filter it. We had like a gravity bag. So you just fill it up and plug it into the tube and it would just filter out by itself.
Nice.
But yeah, I mean, a life straw, I don't think would be the way to go. I think that would be a little too light for it. But I mean, there's tons of different useful water filtration systems out there.
Now, what did you have in your bag that you found that you didn't need?
So yeah, when you finish the first section, everybody definitely has a big purge of their pack because
Mm-hmm.
you've been carrying it for like 4 days and you realize there's a whole bunch of stuff in there that you think would be useful, but really is just taking up space and adding weight. I think I
Yeah.
had like this big multi-tool thing on me. It had like pliers and like this little tiny saw, and it was just like, it was ridiculous. So you just kind of get rid of all those ridiculous items that, yeah, they seem useful at the start, but you're like, I might use this once this entire trip. So, you
Right.
just get rid of it.
What
So
else did
there's,
you purge?
I'm trying to think. I mean, it was all so early on.
Yeah.
I can't even remember. Like, there's, I mean, yeah, the big multi-tool was the one I definitely remember the most as just being
Yeah.
like, this is just a silly thing to be carrying with me.
No, what item in your pack were you extremely happy that you had?
I think so. My favorite sort of thing that I have is, I think it's the only thing I still have in my kit now, but it was my spoon of all things.
Oh.
Mostly because this is a bit of a weird one. Mostly because the curve of the spoon fit the inside of a peanut jar perfectly. So you could really just clean out the jar while you were out there. And it was just like the most satisfying item that I had.
Yeah.
Of all the
Oh, that's
things,
interesting.
it's the one piece of gear that's still stuck with me.
Okay, a spoon.
Yeah, a spoon.
Write that down.
Well,
Bring a
you
spoon.
really just appreciate the simple things when you're doing that for a while. I also
Yeah.
had developed a real appreciation for picnic tables.
Huh.
Whenever
Yeah.
we came
I
across
can
one of
see
those,
that.
I was like, "This is a real luxury right now."
What else did you have in your bag? What should people pack in their bag to go on this trail?
Yeah, so my pack was, I mean, it pretty much had all of the basics in it. I mean, you got your clothes, you need a stove, you need a water filter, tent, sleeping bag, sleeping mat. That's pretty much the main essential items. Mine was a little bit frustrating because I didn't do enough research into my gear beforehand, and I had all of the essential items, just they were all way too big and bulky and heavy. So
Mm-hmm.
we kind of got made fun of a little bit on the trail because we had these massive bags. They were both like 70 liters, and they were just completely, it was just way too much weight. But
Yeah.
we got there and we we did it anyways with it. It was a little too expensive to completely start from scratch down there. So,
Right.
we made do with it. But yeah, I mean, you really don't need all that much, I don't think. It's just as long as you have space for food is a big one in your bag. Like, if you're putting together a kit, you still want to make sure you're able to cram like a good week's worth of food in there, because there are
Yeah.
2 or 3 sections where you're doing about 10 days.
What kind of food would you pack?
Oh, couscous and tuna. That was
All
that
right.
was our big meal. Now we did that. Tortilla wraps for lunch. Peanut butter and jam and tortilla wrap. Instant oatmeal, instant coffee. Basically, for food, you're looking for the highest calorie to weight ratio. You want it to have as many calories as it possibly can with it weighing as little.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much what you're looking for. Snickers bars are great for that.
Huh.
They're a big favorite, I think, on the trail.
I didn't even know.
Yeah.
Now, on the podcast, I do like to address maybe those with limited mobility or who may be in a wheelchair. I think the section where you can kayak or canoe might be interesting for someone with limited mobility
Hmm.
to maybe do that section. But were there any section of the trail that was wheelchair friendly?
Not a ton, to be frank, really. I mean, there would be little bits here and there, but on the whole, it wouldn't be very friendly in that regard. Even
Okay.
in the North Island, there's like, you're constantly crossing farmland and going over stiles.
Mm-hmm.
However, though, back to the Great Walks thing, there are a lot of really great trails in New Zealand that are pretty well formed, and you might have better luck kind of looking at those
Okay.
trails.
All right. We'll do a little research and we'll add
Yeah.
it to the show notes. Now, as far as going on the hike, do you have any other additional like tips for our listeners if they're thinking about hiking the TA?
Well, I'd say I think kind of the unsuspecting hardest part is really more the mental challenge than the physical one. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's very easy to work yourself into a negative headspace when you're stripped away of all these distractions. And when you do kind of fall into that headspace, it kind of just perpetuates itself. It's when you start making mistakes, you might slip, you might injure yourself. So I think it's really just sort of learning how to pull yourself out of that, and that makes the trail a lot easier and obviously a lot more enjoyable. But it is something
Mm-hmm.
you kind of have to work on a little bit. At least I did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
That's a good tip.
it's a little mentally taxing, more physical or mental than physical. I kind of found.
Wow. Wow. Now, did you have a trail name?
No, no, I think that's more of a PCT thing.
Okay. All
Yeah,
right.
no, we didn't have names on the trail.
Or was there some interesting New Zealand lingo being used on the trail that you picked up?
I do like some Kiwi terms.
Yeah.
I think one of my favorite ones is jandals.
Jandals.
Those
What's jandals?
jandals, those are like flip flops.
Oh,
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm going
I
to start
find it.
calling them jandals.
I know it's just a great sounding word.
That is a great sounding word.
Jandals. What are some other good ones? I love the birds down there. New Zealand has a lot of really strange and wonderful birds. That's pretty much all they have really for wildlife. There's no like natural predators or anything down there. So that's a
Oh,
huge like thing if you're thinking about hiking. But if you were afraid of bears or coyotes or snakes, that's like
yeah.
something you can write off when you're thinking about the TA. Like that's just not a concern at all,
Fun.
which is quite nice, really.
Do you have like a bird watching pamphlet or something to help identify them?
No, you just kind of you get to know them every now and again. I mean, it's bird culture is like a big thing down there. They really do take a lot of pride in the native bird species, and
Yeah.
they do a lot of work to try to protect them because they do have introduced possums and stoats. I was thinking of the beer stoats,
Mm.
and they do kind of prey on the bird population. So they're quite focused on trying to keep them all healthy and uh, and alive out there.
Hmm. And were there any like customs or something that you learned to be culturally appropriate
Um,
while in New Zealand?
so a lot of places, especially in the trail notes, I was saying there's people that would offer up sort of like services for hikers,
Uh
and a
huh.
lot of it was all by like just suggested to just leave a donation. Like, if you would go and stay at this certain place or whatever, it's not necessarily expected or you don't have to pay, but it is sort of appreciated to sort of just leave what you can.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they call it a koa down there. It
Oh,
was
a what?
a koa.
A koa?
Koa. Yeah. It was a Maori term for donation.
Huh.
Yeah.
Nice.
So that was kind of the big one. Just people down there though are incredibly friendly. Like hitchhiking is a very reliable way to get around down there,
Uh
which
huh.
is pretty helpful for when you're doing your resupplies, because the trail may not necessarily take you directly into town. It just takes you to a road, and you just gotta hitchhike into
Huh.
town, back and forth. But no, I find New Zealand it's quite kindred spirits to Canada. At least I found.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very friendly people.
They're wonderfully accommodating and like just super excited to talk to you, especially when you're doing that trip. Everyone is pretty keen to hear about it.
Yeah. No, that's exciting. That's very
Yeah.
exciting. Oh, well, anything else you'd like to share for our listeners before we go?
No, is there anything you want me to touch on that I
No,
missed?
I think we got through it all.
All right.
I mean, I know there's more to the hike than what we just went through, but
Yeah.
yeah, I
No.
think this gives people a taste for the trail and if they want to go try to venture. I mean, this is a great way to be socially distant though, right?
Yeah. I mean, it pretty much satisfies all the boxes on that one. Outside,
Right.
not many people around. So now is
You
as good a time as any.
just may need to check if you can get into New Zealand
Yeah.
from wherever you're flying from.
I don't think that's going to be happening for a little bit. I think they're pretty
Right.
locked up for the moment.
Yeah. But it gives people time to plan though.
It's true. It is also like getting into winter there now too, so you might have to
Right.
wait a few months before you can really get into it.
Right. Well, thanks again so much for joining us on the podcast. And actually, one last question:
Yeah.
what is your next through hike?
I do have my sights on the PCT for the next one.
Okay,
Yeah, I'm kind
fabulous.
of kind of hoping maybe 2022 is going to be the year for that one.
Well, I'm not far from the PCT, so if you need to plan a
Yeah,
resupply or something here near Bend, Oregon, let me know.
that would be cool. I will do that.
All right.
Cool,
Well,
cool.
thank you so much for coming on the show, and look forward to hearing about your future adventures.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to Experiences You Should Have podcasts. And if you want to find out more about hiking this amazing through hike in New Zealand, the TA, then please go to experiencesyoushouldhave.com, click on episodes. And from there, you will find the show notes for this episode with links and more information. Now, as you may know, we are an indie podcast. We are not backed by big organizations like NPR or WNYC. And so one of the biggest things that you can do to help our podcast is to share this podcast. Share it with your friends or your enemies or whoever enjoys listening to podcasts or someone who enjoys travel or adventure. People who enjoy experiences. I call people like me experience seekers. So if you know of experience seekers in your life, please let them know about the podcast. And if you are listening to this podcast on an Apple device, please go to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star review. It would be extremely helpful. Thank you again for being a listener. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe to the podcast. Every single subscription helps. And until our next adventure.